My very warm Easter greetings to you all, and especially those of you in the Kingston Episcopal area of the Diocese of Southwark. My heartfelt continued thanks are with all of you in the parishes and chaplaincies right across the Kingston Episcopal area for all that you've done to respond to the current coronavirus crisis, and especially to those in our hospital chaplains and also those who've worked so hard over Holy Week and Easter and continue to do so. This is the third in a series of digital homilies for Easter, which I've been doing during the period of the lockdown. And I'm trying to look at ways in which our Christian faith, centred as it is on Christ's death and resurrection, is something that truly brings hope in the midst of times of hardship and despair. The Gospel reading for the first Sunday after Easter, the end of the 20th chapter of John, tells the story of two of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. In both of them, the disciples are notably behind closed doors. They are shut in. And in their emotional state, they are certainly fearful and they are bewildered. So there are some resonances with our situation today. The risen Christ appears in both of these stories, and in them we see the transition in the presence of the risen Christ in the disciples. There is a transition from fear, deep-rooted fear, to a profound peace in the presence of the risen Christ. There is a transition from a sense of failure and sin to real forgiveness. And there is also a transition from tremendous doubt about what was going on and its significance to deep faith in the power of the risen Christ. In short, the disciples' lives were being reorientated and re-centered, if you like, to see the significance of Christ's death and resurrection, not just for them, but for all time, as the place where God's costly, sacrificial, self-giving love and its saving power had been made clear and manifest. For us today, in the midst of this global pandemic, we are, of course, enclosed within our homes. We are shut in. We have feelings of fear, of bewilderment, and in many families of deep grief at the loss of people who are close to them. There's no doubt it's a tough time that we are in. And as such, we're being challenged about the very foundations of our lives. What are the things that truly matter? What are the things that really sustain us as we journey on? We're learning, of course, about the importance afresh of friends and family and those who are close to us. We're learning about the importance of our homes and our livelihood. But we're also learning about the importance of sacrificial service to others. And it's been inspirational to see so many examples, not only in our health and care services, but around the country in terms of volunteering. We're learning the things that are really important. And we're learning those things also in terms of our faith and what's absolutely central to that. So the question arises about where our real centre is. What are our well springs? Holy Week and Easter this year, of course, for us has been spent at home in various digital forms of service. And the contrast with last year, when we were able to be in our churches, is vast. The contrast for me personally has been even greater, because last year I had the privilege, due to a period of sabbatical leave, to spend Holy Week and Easter actually in Jerusalem, with a huge variety of traditions there, being centred as I was at St George's Cathedral in Jerusalem. And that was an extraordinary privilege to do that. So the change to this year, to being at home, has been an enormous one. There are several ancient maps which place Jerusalem right at the centre of them, notably the 6th century mosaic in Madaba in Jordan, and also the 14th century Mappa Mundi in Hereford. They are, if you like, spiritual maps of the universe, which place Jerusalem firmly at the centre, reflecting the belief in the Christian faith that these events of Holy Week and Easter are the key to the meaning of our lives. The New Testament writings, particularly, for example, in 1 Corinthians 15 or the first chapter of the letter to the Colossians, or perhaps the most famous verse in the Bible, John 3:16, speak about the enormous power of Christ's death and resurrection. That in these events God was reconciling all things in heaven and on earth. They're very powerful and big words and themes that appear in those early New Testament writings. And it speaks to us about the importance of recentering our own lives on God's saving and self-giving love in Christ. The first disciples were beginning to see the vast implications of Christ's death and resurrection in those very early resurrection experiences which were in the Gospel for the first Sunday after Easter. If you like, their lives were being recentered in a big way. And in our lives today, that tradition continues. It's about the recentering of our lives. Martin Luther, in the Reformation period, spoke about the human condition as being, in Latin, incurvatus in se, curved in on ourselves, self-centered living, where things other than God took primary place. And the Christian faith, in many ways, is a journey, a kind of transition from that self-centered way of living to a God-centered way, to an other people-centered way, and indeed to a world-centered way, where we learn to give out of ourselves. There's no doubt that that's a tough transition to make for most of us if we're being honest. The way of costly, self-giving love is not easy. We are being shaped slowly by God's love through our worship and our prayers, and we're learning to express it more effectively day by day in daily acts of care for one another. And in doing so, as that love begins to recenter us and reshape our lives, it brings real hope in the midst of grief and despair. And not only hope for this life, but also hope for the world to come. So I hope and pray as we journey through this Easter season, in the midst of all the huge challenges which we're facing right across the globe, that our lives may truly be recentered on God's saving love in Christ, and the hope that that brings for all things in heaven and on earth.